This is Dreamtime Science, where tonight's most interesting discoveries become tomorrow's dreams. I've got something particularly engaging to share with you. You know, I've been thinking about what makes some people just naturally magnetic, how they seem to light up a room without even trying. There's something remarkable about charisma, this subtle mix of signals and feelings that can quietly shape how we connect with others. Tonight, I'm excited to share a little science behind that invisible spark, and maybe you'll see those everyday moments of influence in a whole new, gentle light. A soft tap of the like button or a whispered subscription tells me these calming discoveries resonate with you. What aspect of science brings you the most wonder? Now, take a moment. Adjust your blanket, find the perfect hollow in your pillow, let your shoulders melt, breathe in and out. In the hush of a late evening, as the world outside your window settles into its nocturnal rhythm, a question drifts through the dim-lit corridors of thought. What is it about certain voices that draws us in, that urges us to listen, to believe, to follow? There are people in this world, some living, some fictional, some long departed, whose words seem to shimmer in the air, carrying a weight well beyond the syllables themselves. Their presence bends the atmosphere, their stories linger long after the telling, and their gaze, whether real or imagined, makes us feel seen, significant, inspired. We find ourselves drawn to them, not merely for what they say, but for how they say it, and for who they are when they say it. This is the allure of the silver tongue, the ineffable magnetism of charisma. Charisma is an elusive current, threading its way through the fabric of human society, sometimes radiant and unmistakable, sometimes a gentle undertow. It is a power that can electrify a crowd, hush a quarrel, or turn the tide of a nation's history. Yet for all its palpable effects, charisma resists easy explanation. It is not simply beauty, nor merely eloquence, nor solely confidence. Rather, it seems to be an alchemy of qualities, a blend of presence, conviction, and connection that stirs something deep within us. The word itself has ancient roots, springing from the Greek charisma, meaning divine favor or gift of grace. The ancients believed charisma to be a blessing bestowed by the gods, a mark of the chosen. Even today, it retains an aura of the supernatural, as if those who possess it walk with one foot in another world. Think of the great orators and leaders who have shaped the course of history. The resonant cadence of Martin Luther King Jr., echoing from the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, is a touchstone for the power of charisma. When Dr. King spoke of dreams and justice, his words became more than rhetoric. They became a summons, a vision in which listeners could see themselves. His charisma was not just in his rhetorical flourishes or his commanding timbre, but in the authenticity of his conviction and the warmth of his empathy. He spoke to the aching hearts of his time, and in doing so he stitched together communities that had been torn apart. People crowded into churches, stood in the rain, packed city streets, drawn by a gravitational force that was as much emotional as intellectual. They listened, not out of obligation, but because something compelling in his being made them want to listen, made them believe that change was possible. Charisma, of course, is not confined to the political arena. It weaves its spell in the arts, in sports, in classrooms, and even in the realm of fiction. Consider for a moment the world of speculative imagination, the gleaming corridors of the Starship Enterprise, the soft hum of its engines carrying humanity beyond the rim of the known. In the captain's chair sits James T. Kirk, a figure as iconic as any in the annals of science fiction. Kirk's charisma is legendary, not just within the universe he inhabits, but among the millions who have watched his adventures unfold. What is it that makes Kirk so magnetic? He is not the strongest or the most brilliant, nor even the most strictly by the book. Yet in moments of crisis, his crew turns to him. His confidence is infectious, his wit disarming, his courage unwavering. He inspires loyalty not by command, but by connection, by the sense that he sees and values those around him. In Kirk, we find a charisma that is forward-looking, adventurous, and irrepressibly human. The allure of the silver tongue is not always benign. Charisma can be a double-edged sword, wielded for good or ill, used to unite or to deceive. History is replete with figures whose magnetic presence brought out the best, or the worst, in their followers. The same qualities that make a leader inspiring can, in darker hands, become tools of manipulation. The silver tongue can sing of hope, but it can also seduce with false promises. This duality is part of what makes charisma so fascinating and so mysterious. It is a force that shapes destinies, yet it is not easily measured or mapped. As we turn the prism of charisma in the light, we see its many facets reflected in the stories we tell and the heroes we imagine. In literature and film, there is a long tradition of the charismatic leader, the one whose words rally the lost or the weary, whose presence galvanizes the hesitant. These figures stride through epic tales, Atticus Finch in the courtroom, Aragorn among the ruins of Middle-earth, Princess Leia on the battlements of a rebel base. They are given lines that resonate, moments that linger, and a certain brightness that sets them apart. Even when their flaws are evident, their charisma is undimmed. We find ourselves wishing to follow them, if only in dreams. But what is it exactly that gives rise to this phenomenon? Is charisma a matter of nature or nurture? Is it woven into the genetic code, or does it arise from circumstance and experience? Scientists and philosophers have long debated the sources of magnetic charm. Some argue that it is rooted in physical cues, facial symmetry, expressive gestures, an open posture, a resonant voice. Others believe it springs from psychological traits, confidence, emotional intelligence, the ability to read a room and adapt to its mood. Still others point to the importance of context. Charisma, they suggest, is not an intrinsic quality, but a relationship, a dynamic interplay between speaker and audience. It flourishes when the moment is ripe, when needs are keenly felt and hopes are fragile. There are, of course, those who attempt to distill charisma into a formula, to teach it as a set of skills. Bookshelves groan with manuals on persuasive speaking, leadership, and influence. Seminars promise to unlock the secrets of the charismatic personality. There is some merit to these efforts. After all, many elements of charm, such as empathy, poise, and clarity, can be practiced and refined. Yet, even as techniques are honed, there often remains a residue of something inexpressible, a spark that cannot be faked. It is the difference between reciting a speech and telling a story that matters, between commanding attention and truly captivating it. In the flickering blue glow of a television screen, one might watch Captain Kirk deliver a rousing speech to his crew, urging unity in the face of the unknown. The words themselves are carefully written, the performance expertly pitched. But there is something more at play, a sense of conviction that crosses the boundary between fiction and reality, making us feel, if only for a moment, that we too are part of that daring voyage. This is the essence of charisma, the ability to make others feel included, to draw them into a shared narrative, to awaken a sense of possibility. Cultural references to charisma abound, shaping our expectations and aspirations. We speak of the it factor, of leaders who have star power, of personalities who light up a room. These phrases hint at the semi-magical quality we associate with charismatic individuals. Popular culture, especially in the realm of science fiction, often amplifies these traits, presenting us with characters who are larger than life, yet somehow relatable. The archetype of the charismatic captain or visionary leader reflects our longing for guidance, for someone who can articulate what we feel but cannot say. Charisma is not confined to the stage or the screen, however. It pulses through everyday life, manifesting in moments both grand and small. A teacher who can make a classroom come alive, a friend whose laughter turns an ordinary evening into an event, a colleague who can rally a team in the face of setbacks. These are all bearers of the silver tongue. Their words linger, not because of their eloquence alone, but because they seem to carry a piece of themselves in every utterance. There is a warmth, a generosity of spirit that invites others to lower their guard and join in. In some cultures, charisma is revered as a sign of spiritual favor, a mark of destiny. In others, it is viewed with suspicion, a potential tool for deception. The tension between these views is central to our understanding of the phenomenon. We are drawn to charisma, yet wary of its power. We seek it in our leaders, yet we fear its capacity to mislead. This ambivalence is reflected in the stories we tell, in the rise and fall of charismatic figures throughout history. The science of charisma is still in its infancy. Researchers study the micro-expressions that flicker across a charismatic face, the modulations of a compelling voice, the neural responses of listeners caught up in the spell. They find, again and again, that charisma is both universal and context-dependent. It transcends culture, yet it is shaped by the needs and values of the moment. A charismatic leader in one era might be overlooked in another. What resonates with one audience may fall flat with another. The silver tongue finds its power not in isolation, but in connection. There is a paradox at the heart of charisma. It is both rare and everywhere. Most people can recall a moment when they were moved by someone's words, by a glance, by an energy that seemed to fill the room. Yet true charisma, of the sort that alters the course of events, that lingers in memory for generations, is uncommon. It is as if the universe, in its wisdom, doles out this gift sparingly, lest its power grow too great. As you drift through these reflections, a gentle curiosity stirs. Could charisma be harnessed, bottled, passed from one person to another? Or is it, as the ancients believed, a kind of grace, bestowed unpredictably and fleetingly? The answer, perhaps, lies in the interplay between the individual and the collective, the speaker and the audience. Charisma is not a solitary flame, but a spark that leaps between souls, igniting possibility wherever it lands. If you listen closely, you may hear echoes of the silver tongue in the voices that populate your own life, in a mentor's encouragement, in a loved one's reassurance, in the stories that have shaped your sense of self. The allure is always present, shimmering at the edge of awareness, ready to awaken at the right moment. The hour grows late, and the spell of charisma continues to weave through the quiet spaces of thought. Beyond the famous names and legendary tales, there are deeper mysteries yet to be explored. The subtle chemistry of presence, the neural circuitry of persuasion, the ancient roots of our longing to be led and inspired. For now, let these mysteries rest gently in the shadows, awaiting the next turn of the tale, when we will follow the threads of charisma into the heart of its enigma, searching for the point where silver words become something more. It is a quiet hour, and the world outside falls into gentle darkness. The air is still, as if waiting for some unseen current to stir. Within this hush, our minds turn inward, seeking to unravel the veiled tapestry of charisma, a force at once tangible and mysterious, as elusive as perfume on the wind, yet as real as the tide that shapes the shore. Charisma. The word itself glimmers with promise. It conjures images of figures who stride into a room and subtly bend the atmosphere, making hearts quicken and faces turn. But what is this quality? Is it a trick of light in the mind's eye, a rare alignment of traits, or something deeper, woven into the very fabric of human psychology? Tonight we venture into that labyrinth, tracing the intricate paths that converge to form the enigmatic symphony of influence. Let us begin, not with the charismatic individual, but with the observer, the one who feels the pull, For charisma begins, at least in part, within us. It is a relationship, not a solitary trait, and it is shaped by the architecture of our perception. As social creatures, humans are exquisitely sensitive to cues from others, the subtle dance of eye contact, the cadence of speech, the echo of confidence in a posture or a smile. These signals, often subtle and fleeting, are deciphered not through conscious reasoning, but by ancient, subconscious circuits that have evolved over millennia. Consider for a moment the powerful sway of first impressions. Within mere seconds of meeting someone, our minds assemble a mosaic of judgments, friend or foe, trustworthy or suspect, leader or follower. This rapid assessment is not merely a quirk of modern life. It is a vestige of ancestral days when survival hinged on reading intentions swiftly and accurately. The charismatic individual, knowingly or not, steps into this moment and leaves an imprint, a flash of warmth, a spark of energy, an aura that seems to promise safety or excitement, challenge or comfort. But why do some people trigger this reaction, while others, equally skilled or intelligent, do not? The answer, as it so often is in matters of the mind, lies in a tangle of biases and heuristics, those shortcuts our brains take to make sense of the world. One such bias, deeply rooted and largely invisible, is the halo effect. When we perceive a single positive trait in someone, an expressive voice, a confident stance, a symmetrical face, our minds unconsciously attribute a constellation of other virtues to them. A charismatic speaker who holds our gaze may be assumed to be not only persuasive, but wise, trustworthy, even kind. This cognitive shortcut, though efficient, is not always accurate. It is as if, in the half-light of our attention, the mind paints an entire landscape from a single glimmering stone. The halo effect is not the only silent guide in this process. Our brains are also drawn to certainty, to the illusion of clarity in a world that is often unclear. Charismatic individuals radiate a sense of conviction, a sureness in their words and actions that we find magnetic, perhaps because we crave certainty ourselves. In the presence of such resolve, our doubts seem to quiet, and we are carried on the current of their confidence. This, too, is shaped by our evolutionary past. In uncertain times, those who could inspire belief might rally a group, coordinate action, or simply soothe the jagged nerves of fear. Yet charisma is not merely an artifact of how we see others. It is a two-way dance, a subtle synchrony between speaker and listener. Neuroscientists have discovered that as we listen to a charismatic person, our brains begin to mirror theirs. The rhythms of their speech, the inflections of their voice, even the patterns of their gestures can induce a kind of neural resonance, a hidden harmony in the brainwaves of those who attend. This phenomenon, known as neural coupling, allows for a deep, almost wordless connection. When it happens, we feel as though we are understood, as though the speaker's thoughts and feelings echo our own. Such resonance is not easily faked. It arises from authenticity, a word often invoked but rarely understood. Authenticity in the context of charisma is not simply a matter of truthfulness, but of alignment, the congruence between one's inner state and outward expression. The charismatic individual projects their emotions, values, and intentions with a clarity that bypasses our conscious defenses. When we sense this alignment, we respond not merely with admiration, but with trust. But authenticity alone is not enough. Charisma is also shaped by context, by the expectations and desires of the audience. In one setting, the quiet confidence of a thoughtful leader may shine. In another, it is the fiery passion of a visionary that electrifies the crowd. Our needs, fears, and aspirations serve as the tuning forks that determine which frequencies of charisma we can hear. The same person, unchanged, may be magnetic in one era and invisible in another. Consider the orators of ancient Rome, whose thunderous rhetoric swayed the Senate, or the silent film stars who captivated with a glance. Each was charismatic not only in themselves, but in relation to the culture and moment they inhabited. At the heart of this symphony lies a paradox. Charisma feels entirely personal, even magical, yet it is constructed from countless impersonal processes, patterns of attention, biases of perception, quirks of memory and emotion. It is shaped by the stories we tell ourselves about what leadership looks like, what beauty means, what it is to be worthy of followership. The charismatic person, knowingly or not, embodies these stories and reflects them back to us. Let us wander further into the corridors of the mind, where these stories are forged. Humans are narrative creatures. We crave coherence, seeking to weave the events of our lives into patterns that make sense. Charismatic individuals often serve as living symbols within these narratives. They become the protagonists in our internal dramas, the heroes whose certainty and vision seem to promise meaning amid chaos. This is not manipulation, but participation in a shared act of myth-making. We yearn for figures who can personify our ideals, who can stand at the intersection of the possible and the real. Yet, every symphony has its dissonant notes. Charisma is not always a force for good. The same psychological mechanisms that draw us to inspiring leaders can render us vulnerable to demagogues and deceivers. The confidence that reassures us can also be used to cloak deception. The warmth that invites trust can be wielded to manipulate. This is the shadow that haunts charisma, the reminder that our minds, so eager for certainty and coherence, can be seduced by surface over substance. Cognitive psychologists have long studied the ways in which our perceptions can be led astray. The authority bias, for instance, predisposes us to accept the opinions of those who display markers of status or expertise, even when those markers are illusory. The liking bias draws us to those who flatter us, who reflect our values, who make us feel seen. At times, these biases serve us well, helping us to navigate the complexities of social life. At other times, they open the gates to manipulation, allowing charisma to mask the absence of wisdom or character. How then do we distinguish between genuine charisma and its counterfeit? The answer eludes easy capture. Some researchers argue that true charisma is rooted in social intelligence, the ability to read a room, to sense the needs and emotions of others, and to respond with attunement and care. Others suggest that it is a kind of emotional contagion, a capacity to project one's inner state outward and draw others into its orbit. Still others see it as a performance, an artful arrangement of voice, gesture, and story. Perhaps it is all of these, and more. For charisma is not a single note, but a chord, a blending of presence, authenticity, empathy, and vision, harmonized in ways that feel both deliberate and spontaneous. It is as much about what we long to receive as what the charismatic person gives. In their presence, we sense possibility. We glimpse, however fleetingly, the shape of greatness, or at least of something larger than ourselves. The neuroscientific underpinnings of this experience are only beginning to be understood. Functional MRI scans reveal that when we listen to charismatic speakers, regions of the brain associated with reward and social connection light up. Hormones such as oxytocin, the so-called bonding molecule, may be released, fostering feelings of trust and closeness. The brain's mirror neuron system, which fires both when we perform an action and when we observe it in others, enables us to internalize the feelings and intentions of the charismatic individual. In this way, charisma becomes not just an abstract quality, but a biological event, a cascade of neural harmonies that ripple through the mind and body. Yet for all the insights of psychology and neuroscience, charisma remains stubbornly resistant to full explanation. It is, in part, a product of the unknown, the ineffable spark that persists when all the measurable traits have been accounted for. Some people possess it in abundance, others not at all, and still others only in certain times and places. Like music, charisma cannot be reduced to its notes and rhythms. It must be experienced, felt, surrendered to. As we trace this enigmatic force through the labyrinth of the human mind, we are left with more questions than answers. Is charisma a gift or a skill? Is it innate or can it be learned? Does it arise from the self or from the meeting of self and other? These questions linger in the twilight of understanding, inviting us onward, urging us to listen more closely to the symphony that plays beneath the surface of everyday life. In the gentle quiet of this hour, one might imagine the countless moments in history when charisma has turned the course of events, the rallying cry that moved a nation, the quiet word that soothed a friend, the glance that changed a life. Each is a note in the great composition of human society, woven from the threads of perception, memory, and desire. And so we find ourselves at the threshold of deeper mysteries. The symphony of charisma, with all its harmonies and dissonances, has drawn us into the labyrinth of mind and emotion. Yet there are other chambers to explore, other forces at play in the shaping of influence and connection. As the night deepens, let us listen for those subtler melodies, the quiet undercurrents that flow beneath the surface of charisma, waiting to be discovered. In the dim corridors of the human mind, charisma flickers like a mysterious aurora, intangible, magnetic, and elusive to the grasp of easy explanation. For centuries, people have been drawn to stories of charismatic leaders, spellbinding performers, and those individuals whose mere presence seems to tilt the room. But how do we quantify such an enigma? How do we, with our scientific nets, hope to catch the gossamer threads of influence and charm? In this gentle hour, let us step quietly into the world of those who have dared to decode charisma, scientists, psychologists, and experimenters who have sought to measure the unmeasurable. The story begins, as so many do, with observation. Long before the language of psychology was forged, ancient chroniclers and philosophers wrote of charisma as divine favor, the gift of grace. In the 20th century, sociologist Max Weber gave the phenomenon its modern name, describing charisma as a certain quality of an individual personality by virtue of which he is set apart from ordinary men and treated as endowed with supernatural, superhuman, or at least specifically exceptional powers or qualities. But this was only the start, a poetic gesture toward a deeper understanding. As the tides of psychology surged in the early 1900s, researchers began to ask, could charisma be dissected, its elements isolated and studied in the laboratory? The first tools were humble, pencils, paper, and careful listening. Early pioneers devised surveys, asking people to rate the likability, influence, and presence of public figures and peers. These questionnaires, though limited, revealed patterns. Charismatic people, it seemed, were often perceived as confident, animated, and emotionally expressive. Yet for all the richness of these first sketches, the heart of charisma remained shrouded. It was in the decades that followed, as the science of social psychology flourished, that charisma began to be mapped with greater precision. Researchers sought to peel away its layers, employing ingenious experiments and ever more sensitive instruments. They watched, listened, measured, and recorded, seeking to capture that fleeting spark. One of the earliest and most influential approaches was the study of nonverbal behavior. In the 1960s, psychologist Albert Mehrabian conducted experiments to decipher how much of a message's meaning is conveyed by words, tone, and body language. His findings, often oversimplified but still resonant, suggested that the lion's share of emotional meaning, upwards of 90%, was communicated not through words, but through voice and gesture. Charisma, then, was not merely what people said, but how they said it, a tilt of the head, a sweep of the hand, a certain warmth in the eyes. These were the brush strokes of charisma's portrait. In the decades that followed, studies grew ever more sophisticated. Social psychologists developed the charisma quotient, a measure based on traits such as expressiveness, sensitivity, and control. Participants were asked to interact in controlled settings, while observers rated their presence on scales of warmth, dynamism, and influence. Time and again, certain traits clustered together: a compelling voice, open posture, animated facial expressions, and the subtle art of listening attentively. Charisma, it seemed, was not a single trait, but a constellation, a tapestry woven from many threads. But could charisma be taught, or was it an immutable gift? To probe this question, researchers designed experiments where volunteers were trained in specific behaviors associated with charisma. In one notable study, participants practiced making eye contact, using expressive gestures, and modulating their voices for warmth and authority. The results were striking. Those who received charisma training were rated as more persuasive and inspiring by independent observers, even when delivering the same scripted speech as their untrained counterparts. Like an actor learning the rhythms of a new role, people could, with practice, cultivate the outward signs of charisma, and with them, its effects. Yet the mystery deepened. Charisma was not just performance, it seemed to operate on a subtler, almost invisible plane. Neuroscientists, drawn by the magnetic allure of this question, turned their gaze inward to the living brain. With the advent of functional magnetic resonance imaging, fMRI, they invited participants to watch videos of charismatic speakers while their brain activity was recorded. The results glimmered with insight. Charismatic figures activated regions of the brain associated with reward, empathy, and social connection. The mirror neuron system, those circuits that allow us to feel what others feel, lit up in synchrony. When we encounter charisma, our brains seem to tune in, resonating like a struck bell. In other experiments, researchers measured the physiological responses of listeners: heart rate, skin conductance, subtle changes in breathing. Charismatic speakers, it was found, could evoke not just intellectual agreement, but visceral, embodied reactions. The listener's heart might quicken. A flush of warmth might rise to the face. In the presence of charisma, the boundary between self and other softened, if only for a moment. One of the most enchanting lines of research explored the idea of emotional contagion, the phenomenon by which one person's emotions spread to others, like ripples in a pond. In a series of experiments, teams led by psychologist Elaine Hatfield and others placed participants in rooms with emotionally expressive or reserved individuals. Again and again they found that emotions, especially positive ones, could leap from person to person, sometimes without a word being spoken. Charisma, it seemed, was partly the art of emotional transmission, a radiant mood, a surge of confidence, a spark of enthusiasm, all diffusing through the social air. But the study of charisma did not end with observation. Some researchers, hungry for deeper understanding, sought to manipulate charisma in the laboratory to see if its power could be conjured on demand. In one elegant experiment, business school students were divided into groups and given brief training in charismatic leadership techniques, storytelling, metaphors, passionate delivery. When these students addressed their peers, the effects were immediate and measurable. Listeners reported greater motivation, trust, and willingness to follow. The mere adoption of charismatic behaviors, even for a short while, could tilt the balance of influence. Of course, this raised new questions. Was charisma only a mask, a set of outward behaviors anyone could don? Or was there something deeper, an authenticity, a congruence between inner belief and outer expression? Studies suggested that while the outward behaviors of charisma could be learned, their potency was greatest when wedded to genuine conviction. Audiences, it seemed, were finely attuned to the subtle cues of authenticity. A mismatch between words and feelings, a note of insincerity, could dull even the most polished performance. As research advanced, scientists began to probe the cultural dimensions of charisma. What counted as charismatic in one society might ring false in another. In some cultures, quiet composure was the mark of a leader. In others, exuberance and flair. Cross-cultural experiments revealed that while certain elements of charisma, expressiveness, confidence, emotional resonance, were widely recognized, their specific forms varied like dialects of a shared language. In the digital age, researchers turned their attention to new forms of charisma, the influencers, the viral speakers, the magnetic personalities who commanded attention through screens. In one study, social scientists analyzed thousands of hours of video, searching for the patterns that distinguished the most compelling online figures. They found echoes of the old truths, expressive faces, fluid gestures, vocal warmth, but also something new, something in the online realm, authenticity and vulnerability, the willingness to share one's flaws and doubts, became powerful notes in the charismatic symphony. Neuroscience, too, continued to peel back the layers. In a landmark study, researchers at the University of Zurich used fMRI to compare the brains of listeners exposed to charismatic versus non-charismatic speakers. The results were illuminating. The most charismatic communicators activated not only the auditory cortex, but also regions linked to emotion, memory, and motivation. In effect, charisma seemed to weave itself into the neural fabric of listeners, forging connections that lingered long after the words had faded. Some experiments ventured into the realm of the physiological, measuring the synchrony between speaker and audience. In a series of studies, teams equipped speakers and listeners with biometric sensors, tracking heartbeats and galvanic skin responses. They discovered a phenomenon called physiological entrainment. As a charismatic speaker addressed an audience, listeners' heart rates and skin conductance often began to mirror those of the speaker. The group, for a time, became a single organism, breathing and feeling together. In the tangled web of human interaction, charisma emerges as both signal and catalyst. It is shaped by biology, by the brain's responsiveness to social cues, by the chemistry of dopamine and oxytocin, and by culture, context, and practice. Its study has drawn on every tool at science's disposal, from the careful coding of gestures and intonations to the electric whispers of neurons firing in synchrony. Yet for all these advances, the enigma endures. Scientists have mapped its contours, traced its effects, and even taught its outward signs. But charisma, like a melody, resists reduction to its notes. There is always a residue of mystery, a shimmer at the edges of what can be measured. Consider for a moment the experiments that have measured not just the effect of charisma, but its genesis. In one such study, researchers followed groups of students over the course of a year, tracking their social networks and influence. They found that charisma was partly a social phenomenon. Those who began to be seen as charismatic by their peers became, over time, more confident and expressive. The perception of charisma became a self-fulfilling prophecy, a feedback loop in which belief and behavior reinforced one another. There are also the haunting questions of context. The same person, charismatic in one setting, may fade into the background in another. The chemistry of the group, the mood of the moment, the needs of the audience, all these can magnify or mute the power of charisma. In the theatre of human interaction, charisma is not merely a property of the individual, but a dynamic that arises between people in the space between speaker and listener, leader and led. And so, as the scientists and psychologists continue their work, probing ever deeper into the nature of influence and presence, we are left with a picture both richer and more intricate than before. Charisma is not a single force, but a confluence of factors, biological, psychological, social, and cultural, intertwined in ways that defy easy separation. Its study has yielded insights into the mechanics of persuasion, the art of connection, and the subtle dance of human interaction. But the search goes on. In laboratories and lecture halls, in boardrooms and classrooms, the quest to understand charisma continues. Each experiment, each observation adds a new thread to the tapestry. And always there remains that tantalizing shimmer, a hint of something just beyond the reach of science, waiting to be discovered. As we settle into the quiet of the evening, the story of charisma's unraveling is far from finished. The next steps beckon toward the practical, the personal, and the profound. For in the wake of these discoveries, new questions arise. How might we nurture charisma in ourselves and others? What are the gentle arts that transform presence into influence, connection into inspiration? The journey, as ever, unfolds onward, drawing us deeper into the heart of the charismatic enigma. There is a hush that falls across the world in the moments before dawn, a stillness where the mysteries of human connection seem to shimmer just beneath the surface of waking consciousness. It is in this liminal space, where the boundaries between self and other blur, that the enigma of charisma reveals its deepest roots. For all its apparent simplicity, one person entering a room, and in their wake, hearts quicken, minds open, and allegiances shift. Charisma remains one of the most elusive and profound forces shaping the human experience. What is it really to be charismatic? Is it merely a constellation of practiced gestures, a careful modulation of voice, a smile that lingers just long enough to stir trust? Or is there, concealed within the folds of our biology and the architecture of our societies, something more elemental, a current of energy, a secret resonance that binds us to one another in ways that defy explanation? The ancients spoke of charisma as a gift from the gods, a divine favor bestowed upon a chosen few. In the modern world, we dissect it under the lens of psychology, probing for patterns in neural circuits and hormonal tides. Yet even as science edges closer to the mechanisms of influence, the essence of charisma slips away, as fleeting and profound as birdsong in the mist. Consider for a moment the quiet interplay of glances among a group of people. In the presence of a charismatic individual, attention orbits them almost involuntarily. There is an ease with which they move through conversation, a warmth that radiates from their laughter or the intensity of their gaze. The social scientist might describe this as attentional capture, the ability to draw and hold the focus of others. But behind the technical term lies something more mysterious, a sense that the charismatic person is not merely performing for an audience, but rather that they are tuned to an invisible frequency that others long to share. This frequency, if it exists, might be woven through the fabric of our evolution. In the earliest human bands, survival was not guaranteed by strength alone. Cohesion, trust, and inspiration became as vital as food and fire. The charismatic leader, then, was not simply the loudest or the strongest, but the one who could unite disparate wills into a common purpose. Anthropologists suggest that this talent for connection, for rallying others around a shared vision, may have been selected for over millennia, encoded into our very genes. The rise of a leader was often the difference between a group that endured and one that dissolved into chaos. Yet charisma is not always benign. There is a shadow that walks beside it, the seductive pull of influence, the delicate balance between inspiration and manipulation. History is replete with figures whose magnetism shaped the destinies of nations, sometimes elevating, sometimes destroying. What is it in the human psyche that makes us so susceptible to the pull of a charismatic presence? Is it a yearning for certainty, for meaning, for the comfort of belonging to something larger than ourselves? Or is it, perhaps, a recognition of something within the charismatic individual that echoes our own unlived potentia? Well, the philosopher Max Weber, writing in the early 20th century, named this phenomenon charismatic authority, a form of power distinct from tradition or law, rooted instead in the devotion inspired by the leader's exceptional qualities. For Weber, charisma was inherently unstable. It required continual demonstration, a constant renewal of the bond between leader and followers. The charismatic leader walked a tightrope, always at risk of falling from grace if the spell should break. But the spell, once cast, can be astonishingly resilient. Psychologists have shown that followers of charismatic figures often experience what is termed transference, a projection of idealized qualities onto the leader, a willingness to forgive flaws and rationalize missteps. The group becomes a vessel for collective emotion, amplifying and reflecting the charisma back upon its source. This feedback loop can be intoxicating, both for the leader and the led. In its grip, ordinary judgment falters, replaced by a sense of destiny, a conviction that the charismatic individual holds the key to the future. The roots of this dynamic stretch deep into the structure of the brain. When we encounter a charismatic person, our mirror neurons, the cells that fire both when we act and when we observe others, begin to resonate with their gestures, their tone, their mood. This neural mirroring fosters empathy, drawing us into a kind of dance with the charismatic individual, where boundaries dissolve and our sense of self momentarily expands to include the other. There is evidence, too, that charismatic leaders can trigger surges of dopamine and oxytocin in their followers, reinforcing trust and loyalty. Yet for all the biochemical choreography, there is a sense in which charisma escapes reduction to mere mechanism. Imagine the electric thrill of a crowd, the way a single voice can ignite 1,000 hearts. This is not simply the sum of individual responses, but something emergent, a collective phenomenon that arises from the interplay of minds and bodies, shaped by history and culture, yet irreducible to either. Charisma, in this sense, is a kind of social alchemy, transmuting the commonplace into the extraordinary, weaving a tapestry of meaning from the raw threads of human connection. But if charisma is a force that unites, it is also one that divides. Not everyone is equally susceptible to the charms of a particular leader. The very traits that draw one group into fervent devotion may repel another, sparking conflict and polarization. Charisma, then, functions as a mirror, reflecting back the values, hopes, and fears of a given community. The charismatic figure becomes a vessel for collective longing, a blank canvas onto which followers project their ideals and fantasies. In this way, the study of charisma offers a window into the soul of society itself, revealing the currents of desire and anxiety that shape our world. There is, too, a paradox at the heart of charisma. The charismatic individual must be both like and unlike their followers, familiar enough to inspire trust, yet different enough to command awe. This tension plays out in the rituals and symbols that surround charismatic leaders, from the clothes they wear to the stories told about them. Anthropologists have observed that in many cultures, the charismatic figure occupies a liminal space, neither fully inside nor outside the group. They are marked by difference, a scar, a vision, a talent that sets them apart, yet their power derives from their capacity to express the shared identity of those who follow them. This ambiguous status gives rise to a peculiar intimacy. Followers often feel that the charismatic leader understands them in a way that others cannot, that there is a secret bond uniting leader and led. The leader, in turn, is sustained by the adoration and faith of their followers, drawing energy from the collective gaze. In the words of the playwright Peter Brook, the charismatic person is the one who gives people back to themselves, who awakens in others a latent sense of possibility, of greatness waiting to be realized, yet the cost of charisma can be high. To be the focus of such intense attention is to live under a magnifying glass, exposed to the hopes and projections of many. The charismatic figure is often burdened by expectation, haunted by the fear of disappointment. There is a loneliness that attends this condition, a sense of separation even in the midst of adulation. The same force that elevates the leader can quickly turn against them if trust is betrayed or the illusion shattered. Philosophers have long debated whether charisma is an inherent quality or a social construction. Is it a matter of individual essence, something woven into the fabric of a person's character, or is it rather a product of context, arising from the interplay between leader, followers, and circumstance? Some argue that charisma is a kind of emergent property, co-created in the dynamic space between self and other. The charismatic person is not simply born, but made through the recognition and response of those around them. This perspective invites us to reflect on the ethical dimensions of charisma. If the power to inspire and direct others is a shared creation, then responsibility lies not only with the leader, but with the community that invests them with authority. The allure of charisma can be both liberating and dangerous. It can open pathways to collective flourishing, or pave the way for manipulation and abuse. The challenge, then, is to cultivate a discernment, a capacity to distinguish between the promise of genuine leadership and the perils of blind devotion. In the end, the mystery of charisma endures. It is a phenomenon that resists easy explanation, hovering at the edge of science and art, biology and culture, reason and emotion. To study charisma is to peer into the heart of what it means to be human, to long for connection, to seek meaning in the presence of others, to be moved by the power of a voice, a gesture, a vision that transcends the ordinary. There are moments in life when we encounter a person whose presence seems to expand the boundaries of possibility. In their company, we glimpse the world anew, as if a veil has been lifted. These encounters linger in memory, shaping the stories we tell about ourselves and our place in the world. The charismatic person is a catalyst, a spark that ignites change, a node through which the energies of a community flow and are transformed. And yet there is a humility at the core of true charisma, a recognition that the power to move and inspire is never fully owned, but always shared, always contingent on the delicate interplay between self and other. The charismatic leader is, in a sense, a vessel for the hopes and dreams of many, a conduit through which the collective imagination finds expression. In this light, charisma is less a possession than a process, a dance of attention and intention that unfolds in the space between us. As night deepens and the world grows quiet, the questions linger, unresolved and glowing like embers in the darkness. What makes a life magnetic? Why do some voices carry farther than others, echoing across the distances that separate us? Perhaps in the end, charisma is an invitation, a call to awaken the dormant energies within ourselves, to recognize the threads that bind us to one another in the vast tapestry of existence. In the gentle hush before sleep, these mysteries remain, waiting to be explored anew with each dawn. And so, our journey through the shimmering currents of charisma gently drifts to a close, like a comet tail fading into the hush of space. May you carry this quiet glow of influence softly in your heart as you rest beneath the velvet night, and return soon to dream with me among more mysteries waiting to unfold.